Buenos dias, Claudia.
Hi, Maria. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great today. How about you?
Good. Very excited about our conversation.
Me too. I think it's very helpful for us to have a dialogue about the things that we care about in education of VLLs with disabilities in a context that we can share it with, particularly our students, our teachers, and administrators who are taking our class.
Absolutely. I think oftentimes we haven't thought about this venue of video to be able to provide the research and experience that we bring to the field. And so hopefully this will provide some insight.
So I am so excited about this, and I thought we would start by the one particular question that I think really contextualizes all the work that we're doing. And so that is, would you share with us one experience as to why you became passionate about MTSS? As we all know, you are a leading figure in the nation about MTSS for our, not only in general, but also in very particularly to the unique needs of our bilingual English learners. So it would be very interesting to really know what was the tipping point in your experience that really gave you this gift of passion for MTSS?
Yeah, I think that that experience was working in my doctoral program and testing a child for a project that my mentor was running an OSIP grant. And we had to go in and test children using the Woodcock Johnson, actually. And I was in Miami Beach in a third grade classroom, and I was testing a little girl who had been in a classroom for children with cognitive disabilities for 3 years. She was Spanish speaker, so they sent me in, and she hardly spoke. But in order to build relationship with her to gain the kind of the trust to do the testing, I noticed that I spoke Spanish to her and she responded in Spanish. And what I quickly learned was she had a lot to say in Spanish, and we got talking, and I actually learned that her mom had taught her to read in Spanish, and so she was an excellent reader in Spanish, even though in all her records they had said that she had a cognitive disability and she was unable to read. When in reality, she was just learning English, and she was probably going through that silent period, and it had extended because of the location and the context of where she was in the classroom and in that school, and maybe with the relationship with the teachers. And so none of the teachers had really noticed that, in Spanish, she was completely fluent and a reader. So I brought that experience to my mentor, and they quickly evaluated her in Spanish and moved her out of that program. And so that really made a mark in me because I had been an elementary school teacher, and it made me think about how many of these kids have we missed, and where would she had her outcome been if I had not found her. I sure hope that somebody else had found her, then her abilities too, and her skills in reading and speaking Spanish. But that was back in 1996, 97. So, it was a long time ago. We were learning a lot. And I think from there, that really stimulated a question which has led my professional career in higher education, which has been what encourages or what drives teachers to recommend special education evaluation for bilingual students, and in particular Spanish speakers. So I began that work in Framingham, working with the school and interviewing teachers about what were the recommendations, or what were the factors that they saw that they needed to refer the student, right? And then from there, when the RTI model was coming out around the same time, it just made sense. It made sense because it was preventive. And so it allowed students to be evaluated from the beginning of the year and not wait until the student was failing to refer them to a pre-referral team. And so I quickly found that this framework and model really appealed to how we can organize and change the field in driving the supports the students with English language learners need.
Yeah, that is like such an important thing, not to have to wait until a student fails to then do something. So that's so important as we think out of MTSS. That is huge. So, given that, what would you say from research is the potential of MTSS in impacting prevention of failure for our ELLs that are really having challenges at school?
So the potential big impact is it's very big. It could really provide, equity in education because we are looking at all the students from the beginning of the year and throughout the year, and we are able to problem solve using data, thereby kind of limiting our presumptions or assumptions about who the students are, what they bring. So I think it has a very important impact in the field. Now, like everything in the world, sometimes when new models come out, people don't understand them and they apply them wrong. And so sometimes, or maybe people have experienced that it doesn't work. So what I would say is there is research around how to measure the fidelity of implementing a model like this in a school. Like, what are the structures that are in place? What are the groups? Is it really school-wide? Are they reallocating resources? How are they monitoring high-quality instruction in Tier 1? And then, using, individual problem-solving teams to look at what the students particularly need, and when those students are bilingual, to include the ESL teacher or the bilingual teacher, because those are the ones that know the most on that background.
That's quite significant. So it might be really helpful if you didn't mind going over what does MTSS really mean for the people who are not yet familiar with it, with this concept.
Yeah, so MTSS has a couple components to them that really defines what the model is. One, it's a school-wide model. That means everyone in the school is involved in the process. That's how we can reallocate human capital, training, expertise, and use data to change those aspects to help spread around the needs and expertise that is in the building. Two is that we provide a prevention structure. So we have to do universal screening 3 times a year for all students to make sure that those students are growing and making progress, and using tools that are efficient and that serve as screening instruments, those that raise the red flag, rather than ones that take really long, so that we can capitalize on using the more longer diagnostic criterion reference test that would tell us where the breakdown is happening for the particular student. So those 3 times a year, and then tiered instruction. And so in tiered instruction, this model allows us to ensure that we're doing high quality Tier 1, and that includes adoption of universal design for learning principles that allows the teacher to reach more students by having those principles of engagement, action, and expression and representation really thought out well for all of our students. So it kind of merges the world of general education, special education, and ESL in incorporating it into ways that really allow the students to show what they know in general education. And then the tiered supports are really our way for us to provide very specific and targeted supplemental and instruction or intensified instruction that meets the student where the child is. So what we've known in the past is that we used to reach the students that were most behind, or the most in trouble, the most providing outward behaviors. And we missed that group in the middle. And I think that is one of the successes of MTSS is that group that's receiving Tier 2 in small group settings 3 times 20 minutes a week as a starting point based on research. It's really an opportunity for us to not miss those little kids or those big kids that just needed a little supplemental support, a second pass at the information, or a different way to talk about it rather than just listen to it and be more actively engaged in that learning process. So those are really the big main components. The tiered intervention could happen in any of the areas of academics, such as reading, writing, math, socio-emotional development, behavioral skills, as well as ESL and bilingual education. And for English learners, it's really important that we realize that Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 all incorporate ESL. So in Tier 1, we guarantee that that's actually part of Tier 1 of regular instruction. But in Tier 2 and Tier 3, we either need the consultation, or maybe that is the professional that could be providing some more smaller group and intensive interventions. And of course, at Tier 3, what we find is that maybe a small group wasn't enough, that the child needs that one-on-one or 1-to-3 connection based on research with that teacher to present it in yet a unique way. So if you think about it, all the students are monitored 3 times a year. Some of the students are monitored monthly, getting Tier 2 supports to make sure that we're not giving interventions for a whole year without knowing whether it works. And then for the students that are more significantly behind, they get Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3.
Yeah, I think that's so incredibly important, because rethinking of how we deliver general education for kids who come from all sorts of backgrounds that have learning rates that are totally different from one another, and knowing that in fact some kids need a little bit of more practice, a little bit of an opportunity. So it's a magnificent model, I should say, or a way of thinking about how to transform and change the nature of what general education is doing, no matter what the field or the academic area is. So in regards to that, but because the world that we live in still has not supported teachers well enough to be able to do this on their own, and they don't have the resources. So often we have to move to a referral to special education, because the child who, or the student who is entitled to grade level achievement is not making it. And so I would love you to comment on how MTSS could be used in the special education referral process.
Yeah, so I want to start by saying that according to the law, IDEA, any parent or teacher can refer, administrator can refer a student for special education evaluation at any point. So if you've ever heard that MTSS is to keep kids out of special education, that's actually wrong. It offers a framework of teaching, just like any other teaching process that we've done, but it inherently also organizes information that you could use in a special education referral process if the teacher, after 2 cycles, decides that this is the time to refer a student. Why 2 cycles? Well, if you think about it, let's say a child comes in September. We do the universal screening. There's a red flag. We provide Tier 2, and we do, that intervention, small group, 3 times a week, 20 minutes. And we see very little gain in that progress monitoring tool that we use. So we decide to either think about frequency, intensity, duration, or the professional delivering that instruction, and to see how we can now make new progress in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And if we develop some change in the second cycle. But after the second cycle, we now have 2 ways that are tracked in some way, so that we know exactly what is now working and what has been tried to make sure that the child is making progress. So after the second cycle, let's say the student is responding, but it's very slow. And so, if we look at interventions, one of the components of them is that we need to have growth in instructional level towards grade level performance, right? So we may find that the rate of growth is not enough for them to get to a grade level specific growth by the end of the year. So the choice is, do we think we could do another intervention that adds Tier 3 and test that out and see if that helps with an additional hour a week of intervention? So they would get the core curriculum, the small group, and then one-on-1 or 1-on-3. And then if that's not helping them move towards that progress, then we refer to special education if we find that special education would be providing some more specialized instruction that cannot be done within the regular education structure of MTSS. So the benefit of that is that now you have this data that you've collected from the beginning of the year, so that you don't need the traditional pre-referral teams, right? where you
Right.
sit down and brainstorm and they give you a strategy and you may know it or may not know it. In this way, we've tried at least 2 strategies, and then the team makes that decision of whether to refer to special education or not. And this problem solving team that's happening now for 2 cycles, which would be the equivalent of 12 weeks, could include the parents. Remember, the parents are the first teacher of those students. So really learning about who the child is happening from the beginning of the year. And I feel that that also makes the teachers have closer connections to students that could possibly stay quiet in the end of the room, or that who are going through the silent period in learning English and may just not be actively engaged in learning or exposed to ways that would help that transition or that stage happen faster in English language development.
Yeah, I think that is like so important to really understand that, and how parents are partners and how they know their children, and how schools need to know so much more in terms of understanding the families and the languages they speak at home, because after all, the language is the avenue of wellness. And often in schools, as we both know, that is not really acknowledged. But moving us along, it would be so helpful to our listeners to go over what happens in your experience. What would be the best way when someone is referred for a special education assessment and evaluation?
So I think the best process is to involve the team that has been doing MTSS tiered interventions. And for the child who's bilingual or an English learner, to include the bilingual or ESL teacher into those teams, because they can really speak to what language development is in the process of academic learning. Remember, these students have a double burden. They're learning the curriculum, but they're also learning English. So there is the problem of identifying, is it a disability or is it a language difference? And so involving those professionals is key in the referral of special education. And then as such, if we think about English learners or multilingual learners, then we must think about different ways of assessing them. Why do we need to do that? I know a lot of schools are have very good models of using, testing and focusing just on tests, but the law has been very clear since 2004, which was 16 years ago, which is that we can move away from only testing. And so I know a lot of urban schools are really busy and they have this process in place. But when we're looking at multilingual learners who are learning English, it is really critical that we slow down the process and we think about where do we learn the best from the structure of the school to learn about what the child knows academically, and disentangle the issue of language learning development. So one of the things that is really critical is to really think about observation as a way of assessment, and that observation is done in multiple settings, because we know if you were to go to another country and you don't speak the language, you wouldn't be talking much, and you wouldn't maybe not even know how to ask to go to the restroom. But if you are in a small setting, you might address somebody personally one-on-one and ask in your half language that you're learning how to go to the restroom. So we want to observe them in the large classroom, but we also want to observe them in an ESL classroom or in a tier 2 small group intervention, and kind of see what the child is able to do. Oftentimes we've been stuck on the achievement discrepancy, where we give IQ tests or cognitive tests and then see whether there is a discrepancy with achievement tests. But in this case, if the child is learning English, you may not be measuring correctly where the child is. So looking how the child learns when he is being exposed to teaching is actually better than any test that we could see, because that's what we call dynamic assessment, is, pre-teach, teach, and then reteach. How is the student responding to the teaching? If that's working, then we know the child can learn, right? So there's a very small percentage of population of students who may be, severely cognitively, with a disability that may make very small progress, but even those students all are able to grow. And that's a concept that, if you think about, we have in our life in many ways. So I remember learning how to read, and I had some trouble learning how to read. And one day it just clicked. I don't remember exactly why, but suddenly everything that was written made sense, right? So my learning curve went from, going very slowly to just skyrocketing. And so it's really important for us to find those barriers that keep that student from having that growth, which is what we want, right? The role of public education is for career and college preparedness, right? Contributing members of society who could work, who could read and write. Our newspapers are written at 7th, 8th grade reading level, and that's what provides information about our economy, our government, and our community, and our society. So how do we get students to get to that level by any means? And that means prevention and intervention that is unique to each individual student, including those that are learning English. So that consultation with ESL and in a problem-solving team where every teacher comes from a different experiences and different training is really the way to go.
I think that's really critical to really understand that from the cognitive dimension, the variability of all the students that we have. Now, if we think about their hearts and their wellness and their feeling of well-being, I would be very interested, and I think our listeners as well, if you could comment on the bilingualism and the social emotional dimension of our students within the school setting, because quite often they only treat as if they have a head and not exactly a head with a heart, and if the heart aches, and the head suffers. So as we really look now during this time where so much stress is going on out there in society, from an MTSS perspective, what is your ideal vision to what could be done for students in remote learning or hybrid or whatever is happening in the near future, so they can also not only achieve that grade level, but they can also feel good about who they are in our society?
Yeah, and we know that that children are being, that equal is not equity in education, and we know that the students are the receivers of that process. So I think the idea of what we can do is make an investment in the beginning of the year, and the investment, I feel, may take some time. But in the end, it will give us much more outcome for us as educators, but also for the student as a whole child, knowing that we're feeding their social, emotional, their heart, but also their mind, and enriching their language. And that strategy is really taking the first couple of weeks to get to know the child. In this time of, COVID, I think it's critical that we use maybe Zoom, like we're doing, to really just go one-on-one with each student and really learn about them. It's also part of assessment is learning to hear what they have to share, what their interests are, because that's how we can build really interactive and engaging learning to happen. So I think that's one piece, is getting to know the child, making a connection, and the connection is really what allows and engages students to learn. And then the second strategy would be to then, after you build that connection, have a parent-teacher conference with the child, even if it's on Zoom, the child and the parent, so that they know that you are interested in their learning, and that even though they may perceive interaction differently between the American way and another way, from a different culture and linguistic background, that, it is about their child, and that your goal is to teach them, and that your goal is to help them learn at whatever way that they need to learn. So I think that investment is really key. And then the second investment that I would recommend is that you engage your peers, your professional colleagues, and your administrators in really taking a look whether your school is actually doing MTSS or not. And so there's various tools. My favorite favorite one is one by Julie Sparsa Brown out of Project Lee. And that website is www.projectlee, which is spelled LEE.org. And she has a tool there that allows us to do a fidelity check of whether those structures and systems and procedures of MTSS are really meeting the needs of students who are, English language learners, bilingual, and even the rest of the population in the school. The second tool that I highly recommend that you look at is the Florida MTSS tool, which is also a fantastic fidelity of implementation checklist that really helps define for those in your building that are not understanding what MTSS is. It's set up in a rubric and it allows you to learn how to do it as a process of evaluating whether your building is doing that. And then the third strategy is really looking at that data and trying to problem solve with a team. Always do it with a team. It's better to be in a team than to just do it by yourself. And look at the universal screening data for the children that you're getting and really problem solve what is the next step in diagnostic testing to see where the breakdown in their learning skills is in the curriculum so that you know what to teach. So those are kind of the 4 strategies that I recommend.
As we have to wrap up, I would like to say that in our next one, we may want to go over our next conversation, go over some of the tools that are currently available, what they can and cannot do, and how they can be used to maximize opportunity for our student population. So as we are wrapping this up, and because we've had the joy of working together for a number of years, I would like to wrap up with something that is very dear to our hearts. And I would like you, I will share, and you will, if you don't mind, a quote that inspires you today as you move forward in this work. For me, is learning never ends. I've been in the field for a very long time, and actually is very important. No matter how much we know, how much experience that we have, there is so much more to learn. So it keeps on inspiring me. So Claudia, I would love you to share with our audience one of your
quotes.
Very important quotes at this point in your life.
I think I'm going to go today with the one that you showed me very many years ago when we met and I started this work, which was if children don't learn, then teach them the way they learn, by Ignacio Chavez, right? So I think it is about the teacher finding the way to learn. And I think that's one that I really love because it's not only about what's wrong with the child, but it's really about what we could do differently to reach each child.
Yes, that's wonderful. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure having this dialogue, and thank you all for watching. And it will be really important to see what questions and what takeaways can you have out of this conversation, and what other topics that relate to the assessment of MTSS and how we can ensure an equity of opportunity for kids that really have difficulties in school, to let us know. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.